All right, kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody. Look, we're back into part one, and thank you for those that have come back. Right, number 12 on our order paper is the results of the 23 resident survey, page 109 of our papers, and I invite Andrew Boyle, Head of Community Planning, to speak to this, please.
Yeah, hello everybody. I could tell from this morning's discussion that you've read it, so I will take it as read.
You don't want to elaborate on anything? Okay.
Happy to answer questions.
Yep, okay, thanks. Thanks, Andrew, and look, I'll let my colleagues kick it off. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Andrew. I'll start with the most nitpicky, then move to the actually important questions. But on page 179, the reputation profile, all of those figures don't add up to 100%. We're missing 1%. I'm not sure if that's a result of rounding, but I just thought I'd point it out. Okay.
Rounding, yep.
Fair enough. On a number of pages throughout the report, it talks about how other councils have experienced similar drops throughout the same period, but no other councils, unless I've missed something, are listed. I'd just be interested to hear where comparable cities and councils are sitting. I mean, if you drop from 70 to 60, well, and we've dropped from 50 to 40, well, that's still a 10% drop. But how are we tracking?
We don't know that yet. So Key Research do individual reports for each council, and we're one of the first councils to get our individual report. Round about late October, November, we will get a comparison of our scores against other councils who have done the survey.
So this is Key Research's words that other councils have experienced similar drops, or is this our words?
It's theirs, but they haven't prepared reports, and they will then prepare a benchmarking report for us.
Okay, so we just take it at face value that. Okay. Right, page 134, which talks about the methodology. It says that we send a letter. I want to understand if we use calling as well as a part of that method, or if it's simply a letter that gets put in people's boxes.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
So in terms of the methodology of how we contact people, it talks about how a letter's sent out and then one follow-up.
Yes.
Is that purely a written letter, or is that a follow-up by phone call, or what is the process?
It's a written letter. I'm not sure that we have phone numbers for everybody. This information comes from the electoral roll, which may or may not contain phone numbers.
It talks through the report a number of times that if we wanted to survey more people, it would cost us more. How much does this cost?
27,000.
Okay, and I assume it's not a simple scaling that if we wanted to contact twice the amount of people, it would cost us another 27,000? We'd have to find out.
It wouldn't. There'd be some core costs that wouldn't be repeated, but it would scale up.
Okay.
And sorry, if I can just add, I had a check this morning. I looked at sort of things like margin of error, and if we went, at the moment we interview about 500 people and the margin of error is 4%. If we went to 1,000 people, the margin of error would drop to 3%. So over about 400 or 500 people, the impact of interviewing more is not that much bigger in terms of margin of error and being able to be confident that any difference we're looking at is real and not statistical.
I appreciate that, and I guess I'll get to in my comments about the individual specific demographic measures, but if there were a councillor that wanted to see a larger sample size, how would we best indicate that? Would that be through the long-term plan process, through funding, or?
Yep. I mean, we have a current budget to do the 400 to 500 people.
That we need to increase it if we wanted to see more.
Yeah.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Andrew, I mean, it's great that things have gone up slightly. It's heading in the right direction, but last year's dived dramatically. It was like a nose dive. It was like a pilot had sent us down. The revaluation of properties, obviously will have been a big factor in that because, if you're saying, do you agree with council and the way, and the perception is we're just rating them more because we can, but they don't understand the system a lot of the time. Do you think that's, and now they're just starting to get those bills, we've still got some lag and some hangover from that?
I do think that and you're right, there was a big drop last year. That was, for us, council-wide, and for all other councils, it was council-wide as well. So it really was, I think, a lot to do with COVID and the general economic tough times, the crime, the health problems, that just affected people's overall mood.
Yeah.
And I know saying that doesn't mean to say that people are less satisfied. They still are less satisfied with council and councils, but it seems to have been largely for an external reason rather than anything that particular councils we or did or didn't do.
Yes, because I mean, back to some of the commentary that was a bit earlier, that the lack of understanding sometimes between central government and local government, and there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And just what we're in control of, and actually what we aren't in control of.
And if I could maybe just add, the survey is of people with a whole range of different understanding of council, and because it's randomly selected, there'll be people here who have, not interacted in they've used all of our services, but they may not have interacted with council other than that. So while it's a real view of what the general resident thinks about council, it is that very much a general sort of average view.
Okay, good, thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Andrew. The first question I've got here is, I'm not sure whether you can answer this, but there's a drop in satisfaction around street lighting. And I'm just wondering whether or not there's actually a correlation between that and the rollout of LED lights. And I'll explain that just by saying that there's some noise through the Safety Advisory Board that this may in fact be a problem for some streets. So can we perhaps seek some officer comment in respect of the potential correlation, Mr. Mayor?
Through Chair, I'll give it a crack. It sometimes does. It depends on when the resident satisfaction survey is undertaken and what's actually going on in the community or through media at any particular point in time. So if there had been some commentary out around street lighting out in the public, then it may very well influence the survey and sometimes the results that you have in here. But I think that also, given the fact that we've talked about street lighting a number of times actually in this chamber, about spots where we've still got some gaps in the network and things like that as well. All of those sorts of things actually contribute to actually how people might see or look at things a little bit more closely, or whether or not they live in some of those areas.
Thanks, Wayne. Yep, I may follow that up through a councillor help at some point. Thank you. The second point or the second thing which I'm just a little bit curious about, Andrew, whether or not you've perhaps got a little bit more information for us. The three areas which I think have taken the biggest drop is Palmerston North has a vibrant city centre, Palmerston North is safe, and we see the drop from 70% down to 59%, down to 43% level of satisfaction over 3 years, and Palmerston North is a welcoming and friendly community. Do we have any more detail in terms of what might be driving that?
Not specifically, and I'd have to agree that that's where the focus groups would be useful. If we had, I know it was said this morning that we can do them. I don't have the budget to do them at the moment. But yeah, we could do, we could, if we had the focus groups, they could dig into that a little bit deeper. But remember, the focus group is only going to be 40 to 45 people. So it's kind of dependent upon which people you get. You really need to do them, it's really useful if you do them both together. I think it's really important that we see the resident survey as part of the feedback from residents. It sits alongside everything that you hear every day, all the submissions that we get, and any other submissions, policy work that we do.
Just ask CEO to speak.
Yeah, just through the chair, just in addition to that, it does come back to the paper that you had before this one as well about communicating back out. Sure, we can go ahead and have the focus groups, but unless we actually communicate back out to everybody about what it is that we're doing, those 45 people that you might have in the focus group, none of them might be actually rung about the survey. And so you end up in exactly the same spot that you currently are. So we need the whole communication engagement exercise, and out of these surveys, for me, these are not sit on the shelf surveys. They are things that we need to make sure that we do put into our long-term plan, because our community is saying these are some things that we want you to improve on.
Yep, thank you, Wade. Thanks, Andrew. Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Andrew. So in 4, where it says next steps, and you've just got the sentence, the results will be used in council's planning and communication. I'm wondering if we actually need an action plan, because, take on board the remark that the CE has just made that this isn't just a report we'll put on the shelf, but I guess I'd have more reassurance about that if there was some kind of action plan that came out of this survey, so that we could be reassured of particular areas that might be getting a different approach. Because, I'll try not to get into comment. So, do you think an action plan could be produced with what we think might change as a result of this survey? Or is that something that we'd have to ask for specifically?
Through the chair, that's kind of what I'm alluding to, is that you've kind of seen, again, it's about, are we telling the right stories in the community? Are we telling our community about the things that we're currently doing? And if there are things that we need to improve on in here, some of these things need to go into the LTP in terms of services, resources, and a few of those other things in there as well that might very well need some of those things in place. But they're like staff engagement surveys, is that we have clearly, when we do staff engagement surveys, we clearly have an action plan on the tail end of that that actually says these are what we need to improve on operationally for our staff. So it's the same with these surveys, is that we do need to have a clear plan out of the tail end of it. I think the paper again that you had prior to this was the start of is some of those things in that as well.
Yeah, I guess that's where my concern is really, because that plan was all about governance engagement. Whereas when I look at the areas that have significantly dropped, roading, lighting, safety, they're not things that will be addressed through the plan that was presented in the previous paper of, elected member engagement, etc., etc. They're things that relate to levels of service. And so I think where you're saying, that will feed into the LTP, I'd like to be sure that the learning from this resident survey is captured in a way that we can keep a line of sight on it being fed into the LTP, rather than just this one line that it will be used. And if that takes some kind of recommendation, I'm happy to put one up.
I've done it.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, how much budget do we need for focus groups? I mean, what is the cost of doing a focus group? Because I personally would rather have the focus group funded and up and running, rather than wait another year to put it in the
Can
budget.
well, maybe you first, because it's your budget line.
It would be about 30,000 for 3 focus groups of 15 people each.
Okay.
Total of 30,000.
So can we not find the budget for that?
Well, what I've done, councillor, I've put up an additional recommendation that council asks the CE to come back to us with an action plan around the results of the survey, and part of that might be pulling together the focus groups. But perhaps I just let the CE. Do you want to speak to that at all?
I just to say thank you for the opportunity. It's kind of, you know, what we've just talked about, but I'll need to go back and have a conversation with the team about how it is that we prepare that. I mean, some of the other things that I just thought about, you know, while we're having the conversation, is that, you know, is there a part, for instance, in the quarterly report that we could have a section in there that actually talks about how it is that what improvements are we making to some of these areas that are, because that's about our service and delivery and how we're going about things, and maybe there's a section in there that we can have a think about providing additional information.
So I don't need to amend that to say, and budget for focus groups, that will be part of it.
Yes. Just bearing in mind that across the course of the next several months is that we are going to be heavily engaged with the community around long-term plan anyway. So, you know, maybe we can take those sorts of opportunities to have those conversations that you're talking about now.
Okay.
And we'll think about how we could do that.
All right, I'll save the rest of the comment then, thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. So we've got the recommendations there on the 2023 resident survey, and although they are slightly up, it's still pretty sobering reading. And thank you, councillor, for just highlighting and also to our CE initiating that there does need to be some sort of action plan on this. We just can't leave this sitting on the shelf for 2 years, because effectively 2022 we dived, and it seems like the rest of New Zealand did. And look, I'd say we've plateaued, but I'm not comfortable where it is, and it's in a lot of areas too. It's just not on, say, rates, valuations, or roads. It's in a lot of areas. So yes, there is some good stuff there. Events has got a decent rating, but I look at the one that really does concern me is the trust of this organisation, and that's gone down considerably. And you know, on page 117, it's around the reputation of the organisation, and that's something that we take pretty seriously as governors and champions of the city. You look at the small inset there, and that's what it was in, you know, 2019, and to see it dived to 2022, and we've come back a little bit, but not much. So we've got to do a bit of work. We've got to understand what sort of work we need to do as well. And I think that's a collective role between the governors and the operations side of the organisation. So I encourage everyone to have their thinking caps on there around what that action plan might look like. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And I think whilst we can see this in the context of a national kind of drop in mood generally, and lack of trust in organisations, it still, I think, behoves us to be doing something about it. And I want to see some tangible actions coming back from this survey. It's not enough for me just to have that sentence that says that this will be taken into account. I want to see what it is that we're planning to do differently. And I think we need to be taking these sorts of things seriously and doing things differently. Otherwise, there's no point in doing them whatsoever. And in terms of, what type of things will have an effect, you only have to look at the areas that have dropped the most. And I'll point out that they are areas of service delivery around roading, around street lighting, and issues like that. And those are the areas that, as council, we're responsible for the governance of. And we might not have the direct day-to-day operations, but we oversee those areas, and we need to be reassured that the message from the residents has been heard and that things are going to be done differently to build up trust again. So I see our role at this point as sort of giving the green light to management to say, actually, we want you to look at these areas that our residents have pinpointed are areas of concern for them. Their satisfaction has dropped, and we want to be informed of the steps that are proposed to be taken to rectify these things. And maybe those steps come with budget attached. Say maybe. They certainly do come with budget attached. But we need to know that. This needs to be part of our decision-making going into the long-term plan. So I'm really keen that we don't just receive a report like this, say, oh, that's a bad report, and then put it in the cupboard. We absolutely, and I know the CEO said he doesn't intend to do that, but we also need to take the responsibility that that doesn't happen with it. That we do identify the areas where there's been the biggest drop in satisfaction and do something to turn those around. So I do feel strongly about this, and I want to see more detail other than just one sentence to say we're going to take this into account. And I dare say that the community would like to see that detail as well. So I think I've made that clear. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak on a slightly different point, although I agree with what Councillor Johnson just said. I'm about to throw a whole lot of numbers at you, so please do bear with me. I have a bugbear with this report and the fact that the demographic data it provides is next to useless for the simple fact that the sample size is too small. And so I have a view that we should double the amount of people that we survey to give us more reliable data, and I'm going to give you the argument for why. So the current margin of error we have is 4.35% for the overall trends. So that's to be 95% confident that the true figure sits somewhere between there. The margin of error is 4.35. So that's a spread of 8.7%. We're going to double the amount of people that we survey to 1,000. That would give us a margin of error of 3%, which would be a 6% spread. So that'd be 30% better than what we've got at the moment. So that's the weakest argument for it, is that for the overall trends, we would have a lot more confidence in the figures that we're getting. It would be 30% more accurate. But that's not really the reason I believe we need a vastly greater sample size. It's because of the area breakdowns and the demographic breakdowns that it gives us. So let's take a comment from page 183. It says, residents from Awapuni are more satisfied with having an opportunity to have a say in council's decision making compared with other wards, Papuoi in particular. Well, let's look at the figures for those wards. So for Awapuni, they have a margin of error of 10.16%. So that's a 20% spread on where the true figure actually lies. So that means that those in Awapuni have a satisfaction rate of somewhere between 25% and 45%. And that those in Papuoia have a confidence, they have a margin of error of 7.79, so a 15% spread. Theirs is somewhere between 22 and 38. Well, what a useless piece of data for us to be trying to draw any conclusions from or have any confidence in. And that's not a dig at our officers or a dig at those who are doing the research, it's just a statistical fact. If you've got spreads that are 15 to 20%, that is not good data to be making any sort of decision making off or drawing any sort of conclusion, or to be looking at any sort of historical trends, because one year we might happen to get, if we only survey, in fact, let's look at our worst area, which is the village and rural, we only had 76 responses there, so that's a 22% spread. If we happen to get 20 people who are particularly positive, well, we're going to see a massive jump in satisfaction in our village and rural areas. Or if we happen to stumble upon 20 people who are particularly negative, there'll be a massive drop in satisfaction that has nothing to do with the work that our council officers or our teams are putting in. So my plea to you is either scrap the area breakdown, scrap the demographic data, or let's double the amount of people that we're getting so that we can actually have some confidence in the numbers we're looking at. Because a whole lot of time, energy and work goes into these breakdowns, and it's a waste of time if they don't give us anything that we can actually make reasonably confident conclusions from. And I know this is a bit academic and a bit, well, no, actually, I'm not going to say that. It's not academic. This is serious. If we're drawing conclusions about how our community's feeling from deeply flawed data, I don't think it is in the spirit of good decision making. Yes, the overall trends are good, and I really appreciate that, and we've drawn a lot of work from that already today. But the area breakdowns, the demographic breakdowns, for example, the age bands they use, I don't know if any of the council had a look at that, 18 to 34, 35 to 64, and 65 plus. They're the three age bands we use. The reason why we would use those three age bands, if I was a betting man, would be because we don't have enough data if we try and break it down into more realistic or representative age groups. If we tried to do 18 to 30, 30 to 45, 45 to 60, because we've only got 140 people in the 65 plus band, 184 people in the 18 to 34 band. These are all 15% plus spread margins of error. So I'd certainly like to see the conversation had, and I'll work on putting something forward as we go through the long-term plan process about providing that additional funding for the survey to see if we can increase the number of responses we get, or, if councillors would prefer, suggesting that we simply scrap the area and demographic data altogether, because we don't make good decisions with bad data, and certainly the area and demographic breakdowns is just data that I can't have any confidence in. So I think I've made my point. I know you're all laughing at me a little bit, but anyway, that's the numbers, and I just don't think they're worth looking at because they don't have any real bearing on how the community's actually feeling.
Thank you, Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and remind me never to debate statistics with Councillor Wood. You got to know your strengths, right? Okay. Look, I'm very pleased actually to see the second recommendation go up today. But I just really want to speak briefly to the three areas of concern that I talked about in question time, and that is the biggest drop in confidence really is around that we've got a vibrant city centre. As I mentioned before, Palmerston North is safe. We've seen a drop from 70% to 43% over 3 years, and that is the largest drop of all aspects of the survey. And of course, one which really needs to be, I suppose, understood and sheeted home is that Palmerston North is a welcoming and friendly community, and of course that relates to our ethnic and migrant communities. Safe city is synonymous with social well-being, and unless you actually start to address safety aspects of our city, then of course that affects directly the quality of life of our residents. Council holds a pivotal position in terms of our influence across those matters that I have talked about, and particularly around growing social capital and growing cohesion in our communities. Being unsafe is central to the reputation of our city, so I think we really need to bear that in mind as we step forward. As I said, I'm very pleased to see the second recommendation up there because that probably is going to give us a course going forward, and I certainly look forward to how that progresses, and in particular funding in particular around Safe City and those matters which I've referred to in the long-term plan. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Andrew for bringing us the news, I suppose you'd say. And it is sobering to see this again and kind of a new trend and a new baseline in some areas developing. So very much appreciate a fresh take. I mean, it was the last survey that really got me activated and thinking, well, we needed a report to give us some options for response here. You heard some of my comments on that this morning, so I hope that this action plan goes a bit further, let's say, and looks at some things at a more fundamental level in terms of what we might do by way of response here. So we'll be very much looking forward to seeing this come back, and good to see a fresh approach on that. Again would reiterate that the things around trust are just deeply concerning and probably quite long-term trends to pull back on. So I hope we do take a very frank and thorough look in those spaces.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't intending to speak on this issue, but I feel like we've spent a lot of time on this and we're trying to throw the solutions out without waiting for that report to come back. Some of the stuff that's been highlighted is no surprise to me. Roading's been an issue, we know that. We know that lighting's been an issue, we know that. Rates have been an issue and we're going to do a rating review. We've got some things in place to fix the lighting, we've got some things to fix the roading. Cycling's another thing, we're doing trials and there's going to be ongoing feedback. I don't think we need to be throwing 30,000 on another focus group as a suggestion or doing twice the amount of surveying. I think this is just a tool to help guide us that we're on the right track. And I feel like it has done that and confirmed some things we already knew and probably highlighted some things around the trust, which I think is a fair point made, that trust around local government is probably an overflow from some of the central government confidence around even just the cost of living. It's just pressure on people's lives. And so there they don't feel so positive, so they reflect that in some of their responses. I don't see that as a surprise. I'd rather just accept the report, wait for the action plan to come back without trying to throw every other solution around it. Where we need to channel our investment is actually in the capital works program, into the staff recruitment and our personnel to get the better outcomes. I could outline several other suggestions, but they're the core things of my debate. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, thank you, councillors. Just a quick writer reply. I don't disagree with any of the commentary, and I think that it's heartening to see you're caring about all this, because in the past we've ticked it off, and I'd have to say it's normally been a lot better than this, by the way, and we move on, going, we're doing the right job, but actually we do need to address some of these things. And so to Wade and the team, this is something we need to take seriously. So we look forward to that action plan. Again, I don't want to try and address any of the solutions on the fly. That's why I'd like to hear what that action plan might entail and what are some key things we can claw back. I think things are fixable, and sometimes there is a point in time when you get judged. And I think, and look, there's, as I said, New Zealand's in some interesting space at the moment. And we're getting mixed up in that as well, as a local government partner. Things like the welcoming, being a welcoming community and the manaakitanga, which we've always been known for, I think that might be a bit of a blip, because the gut feel I have out is the city is welcoming, despite some issues that we've had with youth and different things. The safety is an ongoing concern. I think that's a fair point that Councillor Hancock alluded to. And the roads, we know the roading. I mean, I looked at the roads, the road-related infrastructure, the ease of moving around, parking and footpaths, they're all sort of connected. So if we can deal to one of those, I think we'll start to deal to all of them. But it is good to see that libraries are still valued, our parks and reserves are still highly ranked, our walkways and pathways are still significantly part of people's everyday lives. Events in our public facilities are generally looking pretty good. Great to see Arena getting a real mention. And also curbside, just simple things like curbside recycling and waste is seen as a real positive. So there is some good stuff amongst all the bad stuff. So I want to keep it positive on it. So looking forward to the action plan. And thank you everybody for your interest and debate. We will vote. That has passed. 13 votes for, none against. All right, we'll see if we can get through this. I think we're making progress. Okay, we'll go to the next one, which is around number 13, and that is page 191, which is around electoral system for the city's local body elections. And if I could get Hannah, our governance manager, to speak to that, page 191.
Yahi Maria. For those of you who were elected in the last election, it might just be worthwhile signposting why we're doing this right now. So every 6 years, generally, we have what's called a representation review, where we look at our representation arrangements. And it was, that would be the process whereby we introduced Te Pua Māori Ward for the last election. That's quite a long process, and it usually takes about that entire training, that 3 years to get through that process. And so there are many councils that are doing that right now. And this is the first piece for them in doing their representation review, that they look at their electoral system. Once they've done that, then they move on to look at the rest of their representation arrangements, whether there'd be geographical wards, whether there would be Māori and general wards, etc., whether there'd be community boards. Our council at this stage has not intended to do a representation review this year. However, the Local Electoral Act still requires us at this point in the cycle to put public notice of which electoral system we'll be using. And so that's what we're doing today, is we're just going to confirm by resolution what electoral system we'll use for Palmerston North for the 2025 local body elections. So yeah, that's what we're doing here. And then on by the 19th of September, basically as soon as this resolution is through, we'll be placing public notice. And that public notice goes out to give people the knowledge that under the Local Electoral Act, they have the right to demand a poll on the electoral system. The only thing that's different to that system this year is some of you may have noticed a little bill just passed through Parliament just before it rose. It was footnoted in the report. It has now received royal assent. And what that's done is just fiddle a little bit around the edges. You'll remember that when the legislation, the Local Electoral Act changed to allow councils to choose to have Māori wards without the poll, that there were some other fiddly bits that needed to be done. Those have now been tidied up in that local electoral legislation. So as a part of doing that, they've brought some of the dates forward, and so councils that are having polls, councils that are making changes now have to do those a little bit earlier to give the Local Government Commission a little bit more time. There's also been some changes in that bill around that everybody now has to consider Māori wards as a part of their representation review. It's not a choice to do that. So yeah, that's the only change this year. Other than that, for us, it's a matter of placing that public notice and then moving forward into the next part of the cycle. So that was a very long background, but I felt that might be quite useful for some of the newer councillors.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. So in total, there's 15 councils in New Zealand that use out of 68 that use the STV. Is that right from your graph?
It was correct at the time of the report. Kaipara Council has just changed to FPP.
Right, so it's 14, okay. The chart that you've put up there, oh no, I see we're on it. I was just looking for where we were. It wasn't bolded. No, that's fine. That's good. That's me for the moment. Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hannah, I just had a couple of questions about the risks that you've identified, and you've talked about that poll thing there. About how much would it cost us to run a poll if that happened?
I'm just going to check my report, Councillor, because I believe I put that figure in there. I
Sorry
went
if
to
I
our
missed
electoral
that.
officer, and I just don't want to say a wrong number.
Oh yeah, it's down at the bottom, 140.
I was going to say 150, so I wasn't far off, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also identified $30,000 for a representation review. Would the representation review only be triggered under option 2, or is that under option 1 as well?
So we wouldn't need a representation review under option 1. I would be advising that we should do a representation review under option 2 simply because we don't know at this stage if we were to change how that might affect our representation arrangements. So I think it would be good practice to look at that.
So that would be a report back to council because that would be an unbudgeted amount.
It would be an unbudgeted amount. The amount would be circa $30,000 because we've only just recently done one, so I can give you a pretty fair figure on that.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
So it's your advice or it's legal that we have to do a a poll?
No, a representation. Review.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, there's no requirement to do a poll.
Right.
You could choose to go out to poll. You could resolve to do that, and we would need to do that as early as possible in order to allow for a representation review to then follow, because there's really strict legislative deadlines around what stages of the representation review have to happen by what point, so that the Electoral Commission can get everything in line for your election. So we could choose to go to poll. You could choose to keep the same. You could choose to make a change. The risk that I think Councillor Bowen was referring to with the poll was that should you make a change, having not consulted previously to making a change, the risk of having someone demand a poll is higher. When I say someone, you still have to have 5% of your elected population ask for a poll.
So we'll need about 4,000 people to.
And they have that right to do that regardless of what decision you make today as well. That's what their public notice is about.
We've been through one of those.
It's about whether it's a high risk or not.
Okay. And if they did, we then are in for at least $30,000.
140 to do the poll.
140. So where does the 30,000 come from? Is that if we do that up front straight away?
It's the representation review following the poll. So it's 140 plus 30.
Oh, okay. Okay. It's quite different to how we've done it in the past, but anyway. Oh, well, yeah. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Hannah, I didn't, and correct me if I've missed it, didn't see any reference in your report to the recommendation from the review into the future of local government about electoral systems. Is that in there somewhere?
Yes, it was in the report. 2.7.
2.7. Okay, thank you. So they expressed a preference for councils using STV. What was their reasoning on that? Can you remember?
I've quoted the reason in the report itself. So their statement, the panel's statement was STV can be more representative of voters' choices because a vote can be transferred or can be transferred if a preferred candidate does not meet a certain threshold.
Yeah, there was a much larger paragraph in the full report, but okay. In terms of the perception of ease of use of the system, you've quoted a survey that said that voters, majority of voters in the survey in 3.6 found it easy to understand and use. Was that a survey done nationally? How many people would have been involved in that survey?
I don't know how many were involved, but I understand it was pretty broad because it was in reference to all who were voting for DHBs, and it was done by the Local Government Commission. Unfortunately, I haven't found a survey of closer date to 2008, but yes, so the data was looking at all of those councils that used STV in their DHBs, which is, of course, all DHBs.
So people reported that they found it easy to use?
They didn't have any issue with it at all.
Okay. And then the other thing that's sometimes said about first past the post is that it improves turnout, but the statistics you've showed us don't support that, do they?
They do not. So this data that's here is from what's available from Statistics New Zealand, which is the data that the Electoral Commission collects with local elections. So it's actually really limited data. We don't get the demographic breakdown that we do for general elections, but what we do get is here. And there is absolutely no trend whatsoever. So some councils that use STV have higher than average, some that use STV have lower, some that use FBP have higher, and some who use FBP have lower. The only trends you can see overall across the country is it's tracking down. And the only trends you can see across the country are that the rural districts have higher turnout than the metros.
And so one of the comments that's sometimes made is that a mayoral contest, a closely contested mayoral contest could increase turnout. Is that supported by evidence as well?
I haven't got that data in front of us, but it's certainly one of many factors. That's the problem with voting, is there are just so many. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So just on that line of questioning, because I can see where this is all going, I'm not stupid. So why is our voting so low? Because you've just stated that, STV voting's high and there's only 14 of us now. And are we the lowest? No, Hamilton's the lowest. So we're the second lowest in the country, is that right?
Porirua is one lower than us. Yeah.
Okay. So why are we so low if it's so great?
I'm not sure that I've said it's so great. What I'm saying is that the data doesn't say that STV or FPP affect the voter participation rate. I think we have an abysmal voter participation rate in Palmerston North. There's no denying that. We looked at all of the factors in the report that came in December last year as a reflection on the election. There's a lot of things, a lot of factors involved in at play, but I cannot, from the evidence, say to you that should you change the electoral system, that would have any effect on your voter participation rate.
Okay. So there was a mayoral election in 2015, a by-election, and I was in that obviously with some of my colleagues. That didn't really move the goalposts. So I'm just trying to understand where these comments come from, or evidence comments, whether they come from the Future for Local Government, of course, who trot anything out, or is there other evidence to say that, you know, there's some evidence?
So there's a ton of international research around what types of voting systems and what effects there are. So, for example, if we talk about New Zealand research, there's a paper that's come out somewhat recently, more recent than 2008, 2021. Jack Vowles and Janine Hayward have done a piece of work on looking at whether one of the claims of STV is that it's proportional and therefore you would get greater representation, right? Everyone's heard that. So they've tested it in the New Zealand context and said, well, does that really hold true? They've found that there is a relationship for the number of female candidates who are elected, that they have a greater chance only if the size of your electorate pieces are large enough. So definitely more than 3-member units that you're voting in wards, which of course Palmerston North is one of those. So there is a lot of, I can point to Irish examples, there's lots of international research around what voting systems influence. What I'm saying is that in the New Zealand data, it's not influencing turnout.
Okay, so that's the political academic view.
Academics who look at political participation,
Yep.
yes.
Okay. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was around the figures as well, and you've alluded to there's no rhyme or reason, and they're sort of all over the place. I guess with 76% of councils around the country voting FPP, do you think having FPP with Horizons and STV with the council, do you think that's confusing for citizens?
So that's referenced in the report. So yes, potentially is the simple answer. That where there was a question earlier about STV being difficult, there's no data to suggest that that is the case, but potentially having a mixed voting paper is difficult for people, yes.
In the figures, we see that we've got a couple of blanks for Palmerston North and the 07-04 election, and I guess I'd be quite interested to see what sort of percentage those were for turnout, and whether where we were FPP, whether there was you know, a lot greater turnout.
Sorry, I haven't got it in front of me, but I can get it for you. It's on the Statistics New Zealand data for everybody.
Thanks. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Hannah, for the report. First question is, I understand that both electoral systems got advantages and disadvantages. Would you agree with the assertion that FPP narrows the choices of candidates?
I'm going to take a stab at interpreting your question, Councillor. Is it that you're asking me that in systems where FPP is used,
Yeah,
that the number of candidates is reduced?
No.
What do you mean by narrow?
So, majoritarian electoral systems like FPP, for example, when compared with proportional representation systems like MMP or STV, reduces electoral fairness and representation. That's why I'm kind of, in terms of candidates.
Okay, so if I speak to your question about candidates and how many candidates, in STV systems, yes, usually you have double the number of candidates as you have seats, which means just about 1 on 1 every incumbent has competition. You don't see that as often. Well, you don't see that in FPP systems, simply because the system encourages wider candidates to take a stab at it. The reason being that in it's a plurality system, FPP, rather than majority. So because all you need is more, you don't need a majority to get in FPP. In STV, of course, you need a quota so people can see how hard it is to get in. And because there's a quota, the more seats you have, and again, Palmerston North has more seats than other councils across the country, the more seats you have, the smaller the quota becomes. And when the quota becomes smaller, those who are nominating have more a perceived advantage to nominate people who aren't the image of the median voter. So therefore, as a result of this system, you have a tendency towards diverse candidates. And of course, you can't have diverse people voted in unless they've been nominated first.
Would you please be able to explain how votes are wasted in an FPP electoral system and not wasted in a STV electoral system?
Yeah, I don't like that word wastage, but that is how the academics refer to it. Yeah, so basically once you meet where you have enough votes to get in, even if you have enough votes in FPP, if someone else still votes for you, their vote goes there. So it has no meaning because they're already in. That's the waste. Whereas in an STV system, in a proportional system, your vote can be transferred. So if that person has already received enough to be elected, then your next preference is what's counted. And so it counts towards somebody else getting it. Thus, it's not wasted.
Last question. Would you agree that FPP is best suited for ward systems and that citywide elections are best suited for STV electoral system?
I don't think we can say that, but neither do we not know that, and that's why I would recommend that we had a representation review.
Yeah, but you would agree that an STV system brings in a lot of diversity in terms of representation, whether it be gender, age, and ethnicity.
I would agree that STV statistically is far more likely to bring in a more diverse.
Interesting, thank you.
Hannah, you make a comment here, either you or somebody has, around analysis, that we'd have to re-educate everybody on FPP under a certain age. But we vote FPP for Horizons, we voted FPP for district health boards.
District health boards were STV, you're right. FPP is Horizons, that would be an accurate statement.
Yeah, so why would we need to re-educate everybody?
I think the thinking here was just to point out to councillors that it's been a very long time since Palmerston North has had FPP, and we know, as I said, we don't get a ton of statistics about local electoral turnout, but we can make some assumptions based on what we know from general electoral turnout. And in Palmerston North, where we struggle is the age group from 24 through to 40. So they're right on that age group that never had FPP for general elections either. So if they haven't voted in a general election using FPP and they're not voting in a local election using anything, then they're far less likely to know how to use it at all.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hannah, bear with me while I try and word this into a question, but a criticism I've had of the STV system is because of the quota nature of it, once you've hit that threshold, so let's say it's 1,600, so let's say candidate X got 1,600 number one votes, so they've been elected at the start of the quota. You then, their votes transferred on to the next people. You don't know how many people put that person's number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so the community perception is only 15 or 1,600 people supported you and you're in with no mandate. How do we best address a concern like that where it looks like our elected members don't have community support, or could, to some people may look like elected members don't have community support because once you reach the quota you don't actually know how many people might have voted for you in their top 5, say?
There is a lot of that background data available in the final iteration reports for people who are able to read it. So I think if I was to answer your question, I'd say it would be a matter of how we communicate what the results mean. We could do a better job at communicating that. But I don't think, therefore, as a consequence, that makes the system worse. I think it's just a matter that we would have to, or better for them, but we would have to communicate it better.
Fair enough. I just want to know if there was a mean that we could communicate how that works. So I know I've had people who've been.
I
confused
certainly
by that.
get requests from political parties and other members of the public to see all the final report data so that they can calculate off it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's exhausted the questions. So councillor's recommendation, I've got a different recommendation to this. And moved by myself. Second, I'm going to test the room, seconded by councillor Arnott, that we try and change the downward spiral and have a crack at first past the post. And I'll give you some reasons why. And I thank the officers for their report. Normally around a political decision there would be no recommendation. It's either an A or a B, but I do note there is a recommendation there, which is quite new and stuff we've had previously. Why? I mean, I really do understand why we have been STV, and I voted for it twice, and on the belief that it's fair and it's what the city was doing. But actually, we've just seen the city go down and down and down and down, and I thought we were second worst, we're third worst in the country. If we want to arrest that, and we're spending a lot of time and a lot of money from our governance team trying to get people to vote, which you know, they're trying hard, but there's not a lot of difference. So how are we going to change that? And I get that political commentators, and teased out through some questions, the political academia world love STV, and political advocates too, and look, a lot of you are political advocates too around the room. But I would just have to say that benefits are, Horizons uses FPP, and I've had lots of commentary from non-political advocate people, and they just don't understand any system, and they just find it quite hard and quite difficult and almost give up. And I'm sure you get that as well. I'm sure you do. It is a system that is simple, and it is quite clear and quite concise. Again, I've voted for STV for a number of years, but I just think we've got to try something. And I did say in this motion that to remain FPP for one local body election, but apparently we're not allowed to. There's got to be two. Yeah, okay. And look, I realise that it may trigger some other stuff, but we're going to continue the downward spiral, people, if we just keep on voting the same or doing the same. And a couple of you commented about that just previously in the last debate. So I'll be interested in what you say. And look, I get that we have a diverse city. I look back when I was honouring Ronnie Fitzmaurice, and we talked about the gender just before. This council has been quite different to a lot of other cities for a long, long time. I just look at our central government, Palmerston North electorate, and we have a Cook Islander, a Māori, and an Indian standing for central government under a first past the post election. So I want you to understand that we need to. And councillor, can I finish? So can I finish, please? Well, I'm just making corrections. Yeah. So it's a tick anyway. So I'm just trying to change it up and testing the room, and I can sense that there's some advocacy against this, and I'll find that out in a second. But look, if we don't try and look at things, continue the slide downwards. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Before I comment, I wondered if it would be appropriate through you to seek a comment from the CE as to why there was an officer recommendation here, since you've said you didn't think that was appropriate.
Yes, through the mayor. That's I'm the one who actually signs off the reports. I've just actually made a note to myself as well about recommendations that come to council. I should have actually potentially picked up on that prior to it getting on the order paper.
So you think there shouldn't have been a recommendation, Wade?
There are some times in that as well, and you would have already seen that previously when reports come to council, that if there are a range of options, we might very well just ask you to select an option in that particular regard. So that I take that one. That's probably a conversation that I should have had with Hannah in more detail.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. If I could comment now, Mr Mayor. Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I won't be supporting a move to FPP. And I do have a lot of sympathy for the concerns the Mayor has raised about our low voter turnout. You've all canvassed that well today. And I also hear the commentary that STV can be perceived as confusing. I think what came out clearly in the officer's report is that is a perception, that is not the reality. And even when we talk about the potential for confusion between Horizons running FPP, and I note that was quite a close vote at Horizons as well, and council continuing with STV, the evidence from the last election shows that only 2% of the returned voting forms were blank or informal, which doesn't support this idea that people are confused. The people who voted managed perfectly well with those two systems. That's what the evidence is telling us. Now, of course, that doesn't tell us how many people didn't vote at all in either Horizons or council because they were so confused. But those who engage are able to manage the two systems. That's what the evidence is telling us. STV works well in an at-large environment, which we are as a city, and there's evidence that it increases the diversity around the table. And the Mayor is absolutely right. Palmerston North has a long and proud tradition of gender diversity around this table and some ethnic diversity. But we're still a long way from our representation around this table representing the diverse community that's out there in Palmerston North. And it might feel to us like we've been doing STV for a long time. I've only ever stood under STV, but actually in the system of electing governments, this is quite a small amount of time. And if we're committed to seeing diversity around this table, then it's going to take longer to embed that diversity of representation into our ethnic communities, for example, into our disabled community. We can see that. We just talked about it in the Civic Awards discussion. It takes time for people to realise how the system can work for them. And the officer talked about that in how people are nominated, how people come to be nominated. We know that people are elected in the proportion in which they stand, and we haven't cracked that nut yet. And I think the only way to crack it is to keep going with STV. And the other point I'd make about if we move to first past the post, then that might or might not trigger a poll, which would have costs. I think that's a low risk, but it is a more significant risk than staying with single transferable vote. But the officer's recommendation is it will need to trigger a representation review, which does come at a cost. Because STV works best at large, first past the post, we might have to look at wards again. And actually, that won't get us where we want to go in terms of diversity. That was one of the main reasons for moving into STV in the first place and away from wards and first past the post. So I won't support this. I'll be looking to put forward an alternative motion if this fails, that we go back to the officer's recommendation, would seek a seconder for that, and I see nods around the room. So I'll move that if this fails. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to vote against this, and I proudly do so. One of the reasons why I'm actually going to vote for this is simply because, as a former student, political science student, I spent a lot of time writing on voting behaviours and voting patterns in New Zealand. And I'm very much familiar with all the other voting systems. And I can guarantee you that of all the proportional representation voting system, STV is actually the one that presents or that ensures that greater electoral fairness and representation by allowing voters to choose their most preferred candidates for various vacancies. Number one. Number two, it widens electoral choices and also gives voters, or there's a larger number of candidates who also have the opportunity or the prospect of winning or getting elected. It also means that fewer votes are wasted as votes are allocated to the next preferred candidate. STV also removes the need for tactical voting. We've used STV since 2013. That's 4 elections. I refute the idea that STV is somehow hard for a lot of our residents or constituents. This has been 4 different elections under STV. And quite frankly, what I've heard is that it's pretty simple. I can rank 10 candidates or more than 10 candidates in order of their preference. And it's about giving the voters that choice. STV increases the diversity on our table, and I'm pretty confident that I'll run pretty good elections and I can get elected by my own sort of, doing and that sort of thing, and won't probably necessarily need an electoral system to help me get across the line. But it's about ensuring that this table has diversity on it here. It's about ensuring that we have young people here, ensuring that there's more women on this table, ensuring that there's more ethnic voices in this table, ensuring that the voices of the community, that this table actually is representative of the diverse makeup of our community. And STV gives us that fair representation. We've seen from the report from elected members, and I can get academic about this, or if you want me to be professional about this, 79% of the voting public found STV to be easy to use. While I understand that FPP is very simple, but it has limitations. FPP is best suited for ward systems. Go to MDC. It works better in a ward system. But for a citywide election, STV is actually the fairer and the best voting system that we have. Not to mention that 80% strongly agree, 80% of voters strongly agree that it is easy to fill in the form and rank the candidates. Number 3, the review for the future of local government has actually told us and recommended. These are people who have spent their time a whole year consulting the nation, consulting different councils, consulting academics, consulting members of the public about what's the fairest and the best voting system that we can have. And they came to the conclusion, voila, STV. The panel recommended that the panel recommended to the government that the Electoral Act be changed to require all council to use the STV system nationwide. Why? Because it is the fairest and the most representative system that we can have. And I read here as well from the panel's final report. The most commonly used method is first past the post, and we understand why. Mostly in rural places, they'll use first past the post because a lot of them have got districts and ward systems. This winner-takes-all system is poorly equipped to represent a population's diversity. And for a city like Palmerston North, where we celebrate our diversity, the only system and the first system that we can have is STV. Let's not get caught up by the numbers of councils using STV and not using STV. But we know whether we choose to FPP today, it's going to change somehow one day because of the recommendation made in the review for the future of local government. And we're going to have to do another representation review and waste a lot of staff resources and money to make that happen. So colleagues, I invite you to...
Councillor, can we wrap it up?
I'm wrapping it up. Thank you. So colleagues, I invite you to vote against this and let's retain FPP for the better of our community so that we can represent the different parts of our community. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How do I follow that? That's pretty compelling, I guess. Look, we live in a growing diversity population, in both nationally and locally, and quite clearly STV is the preferred voting system to actually support a better representation. The Future for Local Government strongly recommends a change, not just for us, but for all councils right across New Zealand, and to ignore, I guess, the academia and the disciplines that underlie that report, probably, in my view, would be foolish. It is actually low voter turnout is actually not a reason to change horses halfway through the race. In fact, the fault actually could lie within us in terms of how we actually engage with our community, and we've heard a little bit more about that today. I've actually enjoyed working with Councillor Buss and Councillor Mickelad, and the reason for that is because they bring diversity of thought into this chamber, and they bring a different lived experience, and that is very important in terms of our decision making and making sure that we have balance. And furthermore, the addition of Māori wards has also brought value to this council table. So I won't be supporting first past the post. That is a return to previous MMP days, and it, in my view, is a backward step. So please don't support this, and support the alternate resolution when it comes through. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Goodness, it's a day for statistics today. I'm not going to go as statistical as last time. Look, I feel your sentiment, Mr. Mayor, but change for the sake of change isn't necessarily going to make things better. And if we look at the statistics we have in front of us, 39% is our turnout at the 2022 election. What was our turnout a decade ago? What was the slippery slide we've been on? It was 39%. So our turnout has remained consistent for the last decade. What was it when we had FPP? It was 43, so 4% higher. So there hasn't been a slide in the last 10 years. There's just been a gradual steady, really. If we look at the average of all New Zealand cities a decade ago, the average turnout was 39% for city elections. What's the average turnout for city elections in 2022? 39%. So our city is bang on the average turnout for city councils. I'm not saying it's good. There's a lot of work we can do to make it better, but going back to FPP, I'm not convinced is going to make any difference. The statistics don't back it up. Our own data doesn't back it up. Our own results have been stable for the last decade. So although I feel the need to make change, I would urge that we channel that need to make change into something more productive, such as civic education, or something more productive as the ideas that we talked about earlier today around better information provided to our community about what we do, about better engagement with our students, better engagement with our community groups, better engagement with people from different communities and backgrounds. You know what's hard? Narrowing a field of 32 candidates down to one tick. That's really hard. Yeah. And I just had a look at our turnout from the last election. So we had 20,836 votes. The fear I have with FPP is that you have candidates with exceptional or above average personal popularity, which end up taking away from the representation of those who make it down the list. Now, what do I mean by that? There were 6,725 votes in the first iteration. So councillors effectively got elected in an FPP way. You got the number one, you got your tick, and you got on. So that means 4 of our 15, or of 13 from the general ward, were elected with 6,700 votes. That leaves 14,000 votes for the other 9 members to split between them. So what ends up happening is we have a number of councillors who may have a particular issue they're running on, or a particular personal popularity, whatever it may be, and they make it through, and the bar then to get through after that gets lower and lower and lower, until you have people who end up on council. And I mean no disrespect to anybody, if we did decide to go to the system, who may get through to there, but you have people who, where the bar is considerably lower to get on than it is currently, in terms of the actual number of number one votes you need. And so you could end up in a situation where you only need 400 votes to get on by number 13, and that's why the comment's been made quite eloquently by Councillor Mickelad that FPP system suits the ward system quite well. You look at MDC, they had 5 candidates for 4 positions. Yep, in that system, if that was the situation we were facing consistently, I'd say, yeah, absolutely, let's go back to FPP. But we're facing 32 candidates. Trying to narrow that down to 1 is a tough ask for our community. So unless this recommendation comes with a recommendation to move back to a ward system, which I wouldn't support, then I just can't see it having the effect I'm sorry that the mover and the second to think will have, given the statistics in front of us, don't tell us that'll be the case. In fact, they tell us quite the opposite. So, for that reason, I'll be voting against this and supporting Councillor Bowen's recommendation.
If this fails, Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'll be quick. You know, the last 4 elections, we've had terrible percentage results, and I can't see that changing. The election before, which was FPP, was higher. You know, as we can see, 76% of councils around the country do things a different way than we do. So, you know, I think it's counterproductive having 2 different voting systems in the city. I think that's confusing for people, and I think this is probably a consequence. So unless things change, I really can't see those stats changing at all. But I can obviously gauge the room. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting this. It won't surprise you to hear. As many of you know, I have a science degree. And one of the things that they teach you in a science degree is to look at evidence. And they also teach you that just because 2 things happen at the same time doesn't mean that they're related. And as one of my professors used to say, yes, and milk was delivered that day, which shows you how long it is since I was at university. Now, there is no evidence that the voting system has a significant effect on turnout. There's no evidence for voter confusion. What there is evidence for is that STV gives you more of a consensus council, that it involves more diversity on council, and also that there are no wasted votes in STV, because even people whose first choice might be a relatively unpopular candidate who doesn't get elected, then their vote then goes to their second choice or their third choice. So everybody in the community can look at someone on council who they voted for. And I would say that the consensus that we've had on council over the last few years has been very good. In terms of the fact that we have a diverse council, much more diverse than many other councils, as we find when we go around the country to conferences and so on, we all have very different views, and yet I think we work well together. And so I see that there's no case for change. The evidence doesn't support it. And I will say that we are all concerned about turnout, but one of the best ways of increasing turnout is to have a very competitive mayoral election. So I suggest we all keep that in mind for the next election. Thank you.
Be careful what you wish for. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. It has been an interesting debate to listen to so far. I don't really accept this view that, you know, we're somehow at the bottom of the table. Yes, we are in one column if you say that the entire interpretation is around turnout, but if you actually look at the other indicators, the indicators around diversity, the indicators around the community being able to see themselves at this table, the indicators around being able to work together effectively, I would say that we're well above average across the country. And why would we put all that at risk for the simple sake of hoping to fix an issue that, as has just been pointed out by my colleague, Councillor Johnson, there's no evidence that this change would actually fix it. I would also say that while I understand from officers, you know, that we are having an enforced time frame on us, and it's probably nothing more than the luck of the draw, it is disappointing to me to see this vote being taken at a time when 3 women are not in the room.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've heard a lot of stuff. I better not use the word, I'll get censored. A lot of comments today that I disagree with. Diversity. Let's have a look at diversity for starters, shall we? We have 2 Māori seats, so we won't look at those at the moment. So we have a look at our council, other than at the 2 Māori seats. We've got 1 person who has diversity. By the way, the last council we had 4. Where's that argument? Now, the comments that when first past the post that you only get to vote for one person, that's also not true. In an election for this council, you'd get to vote for 14 people with a tick. It's not just one. You voted for many people as you like. Same as STV, you vote for as many people as you like, but it's the first choice, second choice, third choice. But under first past the post, everybody gets an equal one. So you can vote for as many people as you like, up to 14 in first past the post. It's not just one. You can pick as many as you like. The same as you can with Horizons, you can vote up to 4. So there's a few tales gone out today that you can only vote for one person under the FPP. You can't. You can vote for as many council seats that are available. As far as diversity goes, I think this council proves that it doesn't help diversity, because you look at the last council, there was a much more diverse council than this one. So I think a lot of the arguments gone against FPP here are a little bit, you can pick the words yourself. I will support FPP.
Councillor Dennison.
Wow, some amazing arguments in this debate. I guess definitions for diversity would be one. I just want to make that question, open-ended question. The other one is around just a correction. It's the FPP would have the number of votes per the vacancies available. So that would be a correction on making sure clarity around that point. But I'm for citywide events, elections, and I think STV suits citywide elections much better. And that, I guess that's a personal preference. This data doesn't show any rationale argument for it. I just think it produces a reasonable outcome. And so I'm happy to keep the status quo. The issues around reflection of why it's so low, it does need to have some time to ponder. And the postal voting mechanism that the local body elections promote is one of the fundamental flaws. When you talk about educating the new voters, it's like, who's ever sent a letter recently in the last 10 years? And so you've got a whole age band of people that haven't even written a letter and got a letter posted. And yet this is still what we're promoting for these young people, is the relevant way of electing a local body election. And so that's there as one of the things. I think if we're going to draw down on what are some of the fundamental issues, it's not the voting system. This data shows it's not the voting system. I'd suggest it's the way we vote, which is perhaps the postal voting system. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to vote for a status quo. I'm going to vote against the first past the post. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. I don't want to stand between you and a well-earned cup of tea, but I'll just have a quick right of reply. I've read the room, and my wife said to me, "You're mad, they won't do it." And she was right. You're mad and having a go. In all honesty, you know, we've got political party representatives here, we've got political students, and we've got a lot of people that simply are very wedded to this STV system. And look, I can understand why you are, but it was worth a go to put up an alternative. I don't buy into some of the political academia stuff. This is a political decision, it's ours. And we can all sit there and go on and on and on about this and that and the reasons why, and evidence-based, but actually it's a political decision, all right? So, and people do give up and don't vote. And look, I can give you many examples where they have just said, "Oh, I just don't understand this thing." But if you're happy with 39%, and understand that they just simply don't vote, and so I do believe that's why we're languishing at the bottom. I think too much has been made of the silver bullet of the future for local government. I've been on the edge of that, and I think the whole system's quite flawed, and I could almost bet there will be hardly anything will come out of it post-October. I hope I'm wrong, but I have a strong suspicion it won't be. But look, I'm reading the room, so I'm not going to stand in front of your coffee, so let's vote. Stop trying to hold it up, councillor. Okay, that is failed, 5 votes for and 8 against. No, we're moving on. So, it was an intelligence test, councillor, on which one to... So, we've got the alternative motion, which is around the electoral system for the 2025 local body election be STV, and that it remain STV for the next 2 local body elections and until a further council resolution to the contrary. Who wants to move that? Councillor Bowen, seconded by Councillor Johnson. We don't need to speak on that. Okay.
I will just say, Mr Mayor, that none of us are happy with 39%. Absolutely none of us are happy with that. That's not what this is about.
Thank you, I'd agree. I'd agree. Nobody else wishing to speak? We will vote. It has passed 11 votes for and against. Councillor Dennison, did you press the right button?
I did check.
Okay. All right, thanks, councillors. We'll come back to the chamber at 4:10. Thank you. No. Kia ora tātou. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for hanging in there. Right, we're gonna have a little slight change to the agenda where we're going to go to number 16, and this is around the hearings, commissioners list and review process. And I'll ask our legal counsel, Desiree Harvey, to speak to that. It's on page 255 of your papers. Desiree.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora koutou. Largely procedural paper here. I just did want to note that one of the recommendations for the officers to be principal planner customer, we want to amend that actually to make that the planning services manager, which is a more appropriate role for consideration on this panel. You might be wondering how this relates to the changes to the resource management legislation. So 2 of the pieces of legislation of the 3 have been enacted to replace the RMA, but the transition period to get to the point where the RMA is no longer of any use or effect is sort of 7 to 10 years away, and needs a raft of work to be done prior to that. So we do actually need to maintain a current list of Resource Management Act commissioners, and that's just what we're trying to create here. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Desiree. So the recommendations there are around obviously instructing the Chief Executive to commence a review process for our city hearing commissioners list, according to 2.4 of the report, and 2, that the council appoint a selection panel to consider applicants and bring recommendations to council, consisting of the chair of strategy and finance, 1 elected member with RMA, making good decisions accreditation, and the following council officers: legal counsel, chief planning officer, and the planning services manager. We've got all of those. Have we got all of those people sort of selected and in place? Probably asking you, Hannah, that question.
Can I just jump in here, Mr. Mayor? The Mayor put out expressions for interest last week. 2 candidates came through, and I understand that the Mayor has a recommendation to put forward here.
Yeah, Councillor Michelard, so
we could change that, Susanna, in the recommendation.
and just want to acknowledge the other councillor that put their name forward as well. And the planning, legal planning, I mean, they're all positioned, so we don't need to name those particular people. Okay, are there any questions of the officer? There being none, that's great, thank you, Desiree. Oh, sorry, Councillor Michelard, you want to?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, do I declare an interest in this, or
Yes, you can.
and do I remove myself from the voting?
I would abstain if I was you, perhaps, yeah. Okay, all right, look, we've got the recommendations there. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, thank you. I will ask for any comment. It's pretty academic in terms of what we need to do. Thank you to Desiree for this, and ask you to vote, please. And it's passed 11 votes for, 1 abstention. Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to the adoption of the delegations manual, and that's on page 109 of your papers, and I'll invite Hannah back up as governance manager.
I'm happy to take this as read and take any questions, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. So appendices 1 really is the real changes, isn't it?
That's right, page 203. It's just the content updating.
In terms of with pending legislation changing, because I just note Resource Management Act 1991 there and some other things. What will happen when pieces of legislation change? Do we just make it just comes back into the chamber?
I have a delegation and that sits in the delegations manual for minor edits for redundancy, i.e. where legislation updates just require a simple one-for-one, but where we needed to consider how something might change, then absolutely it would be brought back to the chamber.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I'm fine with that. All right, there's no other questions. So we've got recommendation to council that the council adopt the delegations manual 2023 attachment 2, noting that the financial delegations are still under review. So I'm happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thanks to Hannah and the wider team for pulling that together. And let's vote. As passed, 12 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, District Licensing Committee appointment process. Back to you, Hannah. Page 251 of your papers, councillors. Hannah.
Again, happy to take as read. Just a cyclical situation. Unfortunately, in this situation, we do have previous Councillor Beattie moving on, and a lot of the members' terms are up for review at the same time. That is unfortunate. Vicky Beagley stays on her term. We on purpose made sure that we expired that 1 year later so that we did have some retention there, but of course nothing to stop the other members standing again.
Great, thank you. And the recommendations there that Council instruct Chief Executive to commence a recruitment process for the city's DLC committee members according to sections 2.5, 2.6 of the report. Council agree that the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Legal Counsel and Susan Beattie form the selection panel to finalise selection criteria, shortlist interview candidates, make recommendations back to Council regarding final appointments, and that Council amend the appointment of Directors Policy 2022 to include the selection process outlined in section 2.6 of this report. I'm happy to move that if there's no questions, and doesn't seem to be. Seconded by Deputy Mayor. Before we vote on this, I just want to acknowledge the work of the DLC and especially the Chair, Beattie. It came after quite a period of rockiness for the DLC, where we seem to be in court a lot of the time. In the period of under the chair of Susan Beattie, they've conducted themselves really well, and want to acknowledge others on the board there, being Councillor Rachel Bowen, obviously Stuart Davies, Rod Tipcombe, and former Deputy Mayor and Councillor Alicia Rutherford. So, along with Vicky Bagley, is it? Yeah. So, thank you to them and the work that they have done. Okay, we will vote. That's passed, 12 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, number 17. And back to you again, Hannah, on page 259 of your papers, councillors. The elected members meeting attendance stats from July 2022 to June 30, 23. Hannah.
Well, this again is just a cyclical item. This is the full year to June. What we have done is in this list just have the current membership on there, not the members that were members from July to October in 22, just for clarity for the public, since that's the purpose of this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, the Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor, o tira tēnā tātou. I request that my attendance be amended to meeting to 27 out of 27 meetings, given that I was not recorded for the 3rd of May, when I was on council business as the graduation speaker and guest for the graduates of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences on Wednesday the 3rd of May. This event was recorded in the council's global calendar. It was noted also on the 3rd of May minutes that I was on council business. It is also recorded in the minutes that the public part of the meeting finished at 10:22 p.m. that day, and when you went into the part 2, I was still sitting in the Regent. That you had finished council that day before the graduation ceremony did. I just want that recorded for correctness.
That's noted. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a question from me, Hannah. The statistics that are recorded have changed. So it used to be that all meetings that you attended were recorded, and then they were split up between those you remember and those you weren't. Can you explain why the change has happened?
At the beginning of the term, the Mayor puts out a memo to councillors with an agreed set of definitions around how attendance will be counted. So in this term of council, that was decided that we would only be recording those for which you are members, and part of that was a discussion, I understand, with elected members as to people's workloads and committee membership.
Okay, so it's not a governance decision. Oops, it's coming from the Mayor.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right. Okay, any more questions? Being none, look, we have the recommendation up there that the council receives the memo titled Elected Members Meeting Attendance Stats, 1 July 2022 to 30 June 23, presented to council on the 4th of October 23 for information. I'll look to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Comments? There being none, we will vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Barrett. I want to put your...
Oh, sorry, just it's not yet the 4th of October.
Oh, well done. Thank you.
I mean, it's a long meeting, but it's not that long a meeting.
We'll all be a bit skinnier by then because there'll be no food. Okay, we will vote. Thanks. That's 12 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we're moving through to the council work schedule, September 2023. That's on page 263 through to 265 of our papers. And I'll invite any comments. Does the CE want to speak to anything?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just the first item, standing orders, managing conflicts of interest. Just noticed a change in time there, and officer availability highlighted. That was actually me, not being around at that point in time. So that's Desiree actually having a conversation with me. I'll actually look to see whether or not we can actually get that to the next council meeting rather than waiting. She's away. She could write the report and then leave it with me to present. I think I'll be okay. Thank you.
Okay. It's a long day. All right. The recommendations to council are that we receive the work schedule dated September 2023. I'm happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments? There being none, we will vote. Passed, 12 votes for, none against. Thank you. And then finally, number 19 is around the committee recommendation from the Committee of the 9th of August 2020 meeting. If I could ask the Chair, Councillor Johnson, to speak to that, please. Oh, sorry. That helps.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to propose that the recommendation from the Part 1 Public Community Committee meeting of the 9th of August be adopted.
And the second, thank you, councillor Hancock. No matters arising, we will vote, please. And that is passed, 12 votes for, none against. All right, councillors, thank you very much for today. It was a big day, and we got through a lot of work, and thank you for your energies today. If I could ask Councillor Fitzgerald to close us out with a karakia. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just before I do karakia, can I ask a question? We were going to have councillor only. Will we defer that to?
We are, but we can do it in my room.
Awesome. Today?
That's code. That's code.
That's code. Right, kia ora tātou te whānau. Me karakia tātou. Kia puta, ki te whai au, ki te ao mārama, whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, huie, tāki.
Thank you, councillor. Well done. Thank you to the staff.